for having HSBC. I think for me, it's always a pleasure to join these sessions because of how much of a response I hear back from Enactus students, and how much of an interest we receive and amazing questions that we receive each session. So thank you so much for joining me today. I do really hope that you will be able to benefit from this session as much as possible. Just to give you some more background on myself, I joined HSBC in 2020 towards the end of the year. I started as a coordinator to support different programs from apprenticeships to work experience. Then I moved to support graduate programs and internships at HSBC UK. And recently I got promoted to be a graduate recruiter. So this is something very new for me, this campaign, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. And today we will be discussing the topic that is called interview techniques in the digital world. So how to succeed in online interviews, what to expect, how to prepare, what questions to answer, and how to answer them in order to receive the best possible outcome. And before we move on to the actual part, I just wanted to cover a few organizational things. So we did try to make this session as much interactive as possible and to give you some practice questions. So I will pull them up on the screen and I will ask you to answer those in the chat. So we'll have a bit of an interactive game throughout the presentation today. Another thing to make you aware of is that I've been having some technical issues and I do tend to disappear for a couple of seconds as my Zoom crashes. So please don't be alarmed. You have Charlie Anshel here to sort of support me if that happens, and hold you over and maybe crack some jokes as Charlie promised me.
I don't know if it was a promise as more
So fingers
joke
crossed
in
that won't happen,
itself.
but if it does, you have Charlie there. We'll see. So that's the sort of that part. And also I will try my best to leave some time at the end for the questions to answer them. So if you have any, feel free to post them in the chat and I will try my best to go through as many of them as possible. Okay, so without further ado, let's move on to the presentation and what to expect on today's session. So let me just change the slides if it decides to work. Okay, there we go. So let's start with a brief overview of what to expect. So first, I'll give you a quick overview of HSBC, of us, and of some of our achievements. Then we'll move to the topic of the day, which is the interview techniques in the digital world. And then I'll give you an overview of our application process as we do open for applications shortly. I just wanted to include that in the presentation to make you aware of what to expect. And as promised, if we have some time left, I will open the session up to Q&A to hopefully answer as many questions as I can. Okay, so let's start with a bit more about us. And on this slide, you see plenty of numbers, which I'm pretty sure you have either seen before or you will be seeing them for the first time. And they do have a lot of things on the screen, but I think the most important thing for you is to remember that these numbers mean a world of career possibilities for you. You probably already know that we are a big and international company, international bank, and we have quite a unique history and structure, which means that we are global in a sort of a different way to many other large banks. We were founded in Hong Kong, headquartered in London. We are Europe's biggest bank and one of Asia's biggest. And we do have a strong presence in high growth markets across Middle East, Latin America, and beyond. So as I mentioned, there is a world of global career possibilities for you. And I think one of my favorite things about that is having an opportunity to call over 200,000 people worldwide my colleagues. So hopefully if you decide to join us, you'll get to do the same. And as I promised, just a few pieces of information about our achievements. We do work hard and we do like to brag a little bit from time to time. So these are our non-industry awards that we won with our early careers programs. So that being said, let us actually move on to the main star of today's meeting, today's presentation, which is the interview techniques in the digital world. So on the first slide here, you can see a typical recruitment runway that you may encounter as a student applying to internships, industrial placements, graduate programs. It is very important to note that not all companies have the same recruitment process. Every organization has their own, and this could differ from this particular runway, but this is what a typical process would look like. And first stage that you'll encounter would be your application. So typically this will be in a virtual format. So you would apply online, and this is where you will be providing all your details. And sometimes you may be asked to submit answers to some motivational questions. The second stage sometimes may be divided into 1 or 2 stages, which is an online assessment. And these assessments can come in various formats. For example, psychometrics tests, personality questionnaires, or a combination of those. Some companies also ask you to take these tests in a physical format, where you would go to the office in order to complete them. And it's also worth mentioning that some companies ask for physical assessments, which assess your physical condition, strength, stamina, but these are the tests for professions like the police force, firefighters, or the military, for example. And today we will not be covering those types of assessments. We'll focus on a cognitive side. And the last stage would typically be the assessment center or a face-to-face interview. Often these do take place in person, but taking into account the current climate, such processes now tend to be virtual in most countries. So what we will do in the next half an hour or so is break down each stage, and I will try to give you a few hints and tips around how to succeed in each of these stages. So let's jump into the first part, which is the application process. Technically, the application process should be fairly simple to fill out, but there are a few things to consider when you are applying, and there are a few do's and don'ts that you can take into account. So the first do is make sure that you are taking your time to prepare. Don't start filling in the application form straight away. Take some time, as this will make the task much easier. Gather all the things that you need, including details on your academic achievements, your employment history, and contact information for your referees. Your CV should be updated with the most recent information, and your application form should reflect what's in your CV. Also, make sure that you are providing the correct contact details, your telephone number, and your email address, because imagine if you do provide that wrong, your recruiter will have no way in contacting you, unfortunately. So make sure that you are checking this. Also, you will make a great first impression if you do your research, and I would advise finding out the aims and values of the company that you are applying for, the sector they operate in, and who their main competitors are and what they do. I think the best place to start is browsing social media channels and websites. Another thing is looking through the job description so that you can refer back to it and see the specific skills and qualities that employer is looking for as you are completing the form. Another thing that is important is reading out the instructions carefully to make sure that you complete the correct sections of the form and you know when the deadline is. Never leave any areas uncompleted, otherwise you won't be able to submit the application. And just one more tip is ensuring that your grammar and spelling are correct in your application and on your CV before you actually submit those. And we also have a few don'ts to consider. And the first one is do not avoid filling out diversity data information. And I will go into a bit more details to explain why this is important. Sometimes people tend to not fill it in because they are not quite sure how this can be used. And there is a common misconception that this data is used in order to sift out candidates, and that's absolutely not true. No decisions are made based on your gender, religion, disability, sexuality, etc. Companies use this data to ensure everyone is getting equal access to the opportunities that they offer. And providing this information at the time of application will support you through application process and also in your role. For example, if you need any adjustments, the information will be used to support you in the selection process. And another thing that is rather important is to be honest and don't be nervous to declare your disability, ethnicity, gender. Employers want to employ a diverse workforce and they need to see these numbers in order to ascertain how and where they can be more inclusive. And moving on to the next part of don'ts is don't rush. It's important to know when the deadline is and also to take time to prepare and start your application with plenty of time to spare before the deadline, so you can make sure that you complete it to the best of your abilities. Also, don't apply for too many roles at once. Take your time to research what roles and companies really interest you and where you believe you can succeed. This will also help you to better prepare for the selection process. And I think the last one that is rather important is don't get frustrated. We do know that some application processes may seem quite long and there are quite a few questions to answer, but employers do really need that information. And it's also your answers that distinguish you from other applicants. So don't rush, take your time and fill out the application in order to make sure that you succeed. Moving on to the next part of the application process, which is the online assessment. So 76% of organizations with more than 100 employees, they use tests for external hiring, and they are used in order to reduce the time and cost of hiring for employers. It also removes unconscious and conscious bias from the hiring process. So what are employers looking for with those online tests? This actually depends on the type of the test, and your performance in these tests will often determine whether you will pass to the last stage of the selection process. So it is very, very important that you take them seriously and that you do well in them. Cognitive assessments tend to be the most popular form of online assessments. So let's take a bit of a deep dive into the cognitive skills and cognitive assessments. So cognitive skills is a sort of a fancy way of saying core skills. Nothing to be worried or nervous about. All of you use these skills on a daily basis at your university, and you are fully capable of doing these tests, trust me. These are the skills your brain uses to think, read, learn, remember, reason, and pay attention. So once again, nothing to be worried or confused about. We will now look at how those skills can be applied to the assessments. So assessments that you will come across are verbal, numerical, and critical. At HSBC, we use critical and numerical tests, which will include scenarios relating to the job role that you apply to. So we spoke about what cognitive skills are, but how will we look at those core skills in relation to assessments? So these assessments, they look at your ability to reason, to understand the graphs, to understand data and information, recordings, webinars, etc. They also look at your problem-solving skills. How do you take information given to you in order to solve the problem? How you understand the ideas and how you're reaching the correct conclusion? How reliable is the data provided? Is the conclusion justified? And also, they look at your efficiency to learn quickly. Although in real life, an employer won't necessarily be standing at your desk timing you, you will have deadlines to meet and you need to show that you can accommodate and you can learn quickly. So let's dive a bit deeper into the numerical reasoning tests and what they can be. So up on the screen, you can see a few types of things that you can expect from a numerical reasoning tests. So these will be real world examples and issues, they will be work relevant, and they will be data and mathematical questions. So you will likely come across some data analysis questions in the process. Essentially, you are going to be reasoning with numbers and coming to a conclusion. So that being said, let's put this knowledge into practice so you better understand what those questions are. So on the screen now, you can see an example of those numerical reasoning tests. So we'll take some time to look at the example and talk through the steps of how we answer this. So we want to ensure everyone understands the key steps to get to the conclusion. So as you can see, this is a sort of a real life example. And the question is, your digital marketing team has given you this month's figures for the website views. On average, how many views have you received per day over the whole month? So there are 5 options, and occasionally you may have just a written box to write the answer. So I will give you a couple of minutes to read through the question once again and to choose one of these options in order to answer the question, and then we'll move to discussing what is the actual correct answer. So let's say 2 or 3 minutes. Feel free also to post these questions, the answer in the chat, and we'll look through the answers together as well. You guys are very fast. Not gonna lie, it took me quite some time in order to figure out what to answer here. Okay, I'm gonna give you just one more minute and then we can jump on to discussing. Okay, so let me just change the slide. So I can see in the chat that majority of you answered C. We have some B's and some A's as well. So let's discuss this together and come to a conclusion, actually, which answer was correct. So how do we go about this, this question? So actually, it's fairly straightforward. we have 4 weeks and we need to work out the average for each day. So firstly, we add up the numbers for each week to get the monthly total. Next, we need to calculate the number of days in a 4-week period. So 4 multiplied by 7 is 28. And then we will take the monthly total of views and divide it by the amount of days. So this will give you 101.4, which is the option C. So great job to everyone, and especially to those who answered the option C. Hopefully those who did choose another option were able to understand why the correct option was C, and this explanation was good enough to sort of convince you in other option. So I think the important factor in these is reading the information clearly and also trying to understand what the question is asking exactly. This is what employer is looking for in an answer. So great job, everyone. We will also have one more question, similar question like that. So everyone will have a chance to participate in one more activity. And next part is the critical and logical reasoning test. And what are they? So there are a few key principles that we look at, and you can see them on the screen. And responding to real world scenarios that relate to the job role is the main premise of critical and logical reasoning tests. Problem solving is important, and alongside with deducing conclusions, determining whether conclusions follow from text, also logical inferences, what is true or false based on the data provided, evaluating evidence, is the evidence or conclusions right, does it follow the data that is there, also identifying assumptions, deciding if an assumption is being made, is the evidence there, is this a fact, and also judging arguments. Are those arguments strong or weak? So once again, we have a bit of a practical question here in order to understand better what those tests are. So on the slide here, we have a bit of an explanation of the next question. So let me just read it out to you. So the following question consists of a statement followed by 4 possible conclusions. Please consider the content of each statement as completely true. For each of the suggested conclusions, you must decide whether or not it logically follows beyond a reasonable doubt based on reason and common sense from the information that we have provided. If you think that the proposed conclusion follows beyond a reasonable doubt, even though it may be not fully substantiated by the information in the statement, you would select conclusion follows. If you think that the conclusion does not follow beyond a reasonable doubt, you would select conclusion does not follow. So each conclusion should always be considered separately. So remember, we have to either choose conclusion follows or conclusion does not follow. So let me move to the question on the next slide. And I will read it out to you, and I will also read out the questions. Then I'll give you some time to read it yourself, think it over, and think of the answer. So, Marcotronics Limited was established in 1992 and now consists of 3 divisions: telecoms, consumables, and infrastructure. After 2 years of trading, the telecoms division became the first to be profitable and has maintained the highest profit margin. By 1998, consumables and infrastructure reached profitability, the latter having its peak in 2010 at 12%. Then we have 4 statements, and we have to decide whether the conclusion follows or does not follow. So the first statement is, None of the divisions were profitable in 1992. Second statement, the maximum profit margin for mechatronics is 12%. Third statement, infrastructure was more profitable than consumables in 2010. And fourth statement, telecoms was more profitable than consumables and infrastructure in 2014. So remember, we have to consider the sentence on the left side of the screen, and then we have to decide whether the statements on the right side of the screen, whether the conclusion follows or does not follow. So I'll give you around 5-ish minutes to think it over, and you can, again, you can post your answers in the chat and we can discuss them together. So I'll keep quiet for now to give you some time to think. Let me give you just 2-ish more minutes, and then we move to the solving of the problem. Also, another thing to remember that there can be more than one that follows.
Just got a quick question in the chat, Anastasia. Do these are these questions timed in the application process?
So it would depend on which part they're in. If it's, for example, for us, if they are in online immersive assessment, then no, it is not timed. If they are in the next part as a part of a job simulation, yes, they are timed. But if you need any adjustments and you need the time to be increased, we are more than happy to accommodate this and increase the time for you. Hopefully that answers the question. Also, it is not a unified answer for all of the companies. It might differ from employer to employer whether or not these are timed. Okay, I can see that we have quite a lot of answers in the chat. So I think we can move on because we still have quite a few things to cover and I don't want us to run out of time. So let me move to the next slide where we will have our answers and we will discuss them together. So for the option 1, most of you, or practically all of you, were correct. Conclusion does follow. As founded in 1992, it took them 2 years to become profitable. Option 2, again, most of you were correct. It does not follow. We can't really tell about this. Evidence isn't there, so we can't say beyond reasonable doubt. We could say that the infrastructure division at Macrotronics had a maximum profit margin of 12% in 2010, but as the other two divisions could have higher or lower profit margins, you can't say beyond reasonable doubt that's the company margin, what's the company margin may be. Option 3, again, you were correct, does not follow. At no point is there explicit which of the two divisions mentioned were most profitable. And option 4, conclusion follows. Final one does follow. Based on the evidence, we can say telecoms is and was more profitable than the other two divisions. Well done. I didn't give you a long time in order to answer that. Usually, once again, you'd have a bit more time to focus and concentrate. And also, there is no pressure in being on the call and trying to answer that question. So once again, great job, everyone. Most of you did answer that question correctly. So let's move to the next part of the recruitment process, which is the interviews. And there are typically two interview styles, strength and competency-based interviews. There are two main types. And I think with competency-based interviews, you may be more familiar with those, as it essentially tries to find out whether someone has the skills that match the role they are interviewing through evidence from your past experience. And during the competency-based interviews, you will be asked questions which will give you the opportunity to demonstrate your competence by giving specific examples of when you've previously used your skills in the face of challenges and in order to solve problems. On the other hand, we have a strength-based assessments, strength-based interviews. Strength-based assessments explore not only whether you have an interest to the role you are applying for, but also if you will enjoy it. So first things first, what is a strength? So it's an energizing activity that is done well, done often, and it feels good to those engaged in it. So a strength-based assessment aims to identify people that will not only perform exceptionally well, but they will have a genuine motivation and energy for what they do. So moving on, let's explore also the differences and things that can give you a better understanding in order to distinguish those two types and sort of tips and tricks on how to prepare to answer the questions. So the best way to look at what is strength-based recruitment, it's all about what you can bring to the role that cannot be taught to you easily. Those are your strengths. So you want to be natural, you want to let your character show through the interview, and it's usually difficult to prepare or have pre-rehearsed answers for this type of interview because there is a sort of a broad range of questions which you can be asked. The best way to perform well is by being natural in your responses. During these interviews, typically, you can expect limited probing questions from your interviewer, as they will generally allow you to elaborate as much as you think it's appropriate in order to demonstrate your strength in that particular question. Competency-based assessments, on the other hand, they evaluate how much you know and what your skills are based on your experience and how you can apply them to the role. It uses your experience in other roles, academic experience, to generate examples for your skills. And by knowing this, you will know how to prepare for these interviews. During a competency-based interview, you will generally be probed to elaborate if the interviewer feels it's needed. And something to consider in preparation for competency-based question is reading the job description and reflecting on the competencies needed and how you have demonstrated them in the past. Okay, moving on to video interviews and things that you need to consider before you actually start your interview. So the first thing that is important is webcam placing. I think it's important to test your webcam, make sure it works, position it somewhere where there is light and you can present yourself clearly. Also trying to avoid tablet or phone camera if you can. And also making sure that the main light source, a window or a lamp, is not right behind you, because you will look like a silhouette or a ghost and your interviewer won't be able to see you clearly. And it's not just an engaging experience to have an interview with a person that you can't really see. Another thing is managing the environment and the background. Be mindful of what your surroundings are. Make sure there is no clutter in the background, any embarrassing posters or photos are not on the wall behind you, or a mirror that might reflect something you don't want others to see. A good advice, if there is no other way to ensure that, is to have a virtual Zoom background, just as I do. And another thing that is important to take into account is making sure that the things are working. You have stable internet connection. If possible, use a wired Ethernet connection instead of Wi-Fi. And if not possible, make sure you sit as close to your router as possible. If some technical issues happen, usually we are more than understanding, because sometimes the technology is something that we cannot control and we have to be mindful of that. So usually everyone is pretty understanding, and if you drop off, you can then rejoin without any problems. Also, another thing to consider is make sure that your laptop is plugged in so it suddenly does not die. And also you can test a microphone and web camera beforehand. Sometimes companies have an online testing platform where you will have an opportunity to test and make sure that everything is working well, and you can access the website for the online test or for the online interview. Another thing to consider is, if you live with someone else, you can write a note on the door that can say that you are in the interview and you don't like to be disturbed. And also you can put it on the front door if there are any deliveries that you're expecting, to just make sure that they know that you are busy. Also, if you live with anyone, try to ask them to not make too much noise or start any big downloads, otherwise your internet might crash. And next thing to consider is dress and appearance. And I think the best advice would be dressing exactly as you would for an in-person interview. And if you have any doubts on what to wear, you can ask the recruiter how to dress, but you can never go wrong with dressing a bit more formally than you normally would. Another thing to consider is that colors actually come across a bit differently on camera. So I might not want to wear colors that contrast too much on your camera. And usually when you are testing your webcam, you will be able to see that and have some time to go change. And this is an example where things went wrong. Remember, if something happens, you are not on national TV, and this is not something that will become a meme for years and years to follow. Okay, Another thing which I have for you is another quick test, and we will be discussing the best way, or one of the best ways, to answer interview questions, which is the STAR technique. So I think it is the best way to convey your point and to convince the interviewer of your answer by using examples, regardless of the type of the interview. So what we'll do now is we will go on discussing letter by letter, and I will be asking you to give me the word that stands behind that letter. So let's start by sort of determining why we use the STAR technique. So it allows you to stay focused on your answer, avoid going off on a tangent or leaving any parts of question unanswered. It also benefits the interviewer as you provide them with a digestible but compelling narrative of your example and your answer. So let's break it down together. I'm sure you already know the answer, but what does stand behind S? Let me see your answers in the chat. Oh, I can see that someone is already starting to put the answers for the whole star. So S stands for situation. So you guys are, of course, right. So this is where you set the scene as you would when you are telling the story. You give someone context of the example you're about to provide, but it is also important to be concise and only include necessary details. Next is T, and T stands for, feel free to put it in the chat, most of you already did. And it stands for task. Oops. Let me just, okay, there we go. T stands for task. So this stands for what did you have to do? What was your responsibility? Again, it's important to stick to including what is necessary to answer the question. And if you are working on a project with multiple tasks at hand, only use the relevant one or once in order to answer the question. So task is basically a to-do list. Yes, it's what you had to do in order to resolve that situation or succeed in that example that you are providing. Next letter is A, and A stands for, I can see some of the answers already in the chat. It is action indeed. Great. So in action, you would describe your actions step by step, keep them structured, but also narrate them in a chronological order. Don't only include positive ones. If you struggled, be honest about it and explain the steps that you took. And last but not least, we have R. And R stands for result. Apologies, losing my voice. So result is actually the step that many people tend to leave out. But once you narrate your actions, your interviewer will want to see the results. So what came out of it? And it's important that you include the outcomes of the example that you just provided. If it wasn't all positive, that's totally fine. Be honest about it. Your interviewer will want to see how you handle different challenges as well. So great job, everyone, as always. Let me move on to the next slide. And this is the last part of the recruitment process for most of the employers, and they usually last for the whole day or for a few hours. For some companies, they can last a couple of days. They do vary in sizes. There are some with as little as 5 to 6 people, which is how we typically hold our assessment centers. but they can have up to some can have up to 100 candidates attending at the same time. And these assessment centers tend to be in person, meaning that you would go to a company's office or a prearranged venue and you meet your assessors on and other candidates in person. However, due to some recent circumstances that we are all aware of, those assessment centers were shifted into a virtual realm, and most of them were conducted virtually via Zoom or any other platforms. So in order for you to succeed, we do have a few tips and tricks on how you can perform best in ACs in the digital world. So a few things to consider is researching the role and the company, know about the company you want to join, what is their culture, what is their background, what are your reasons for wanting to join, and also what are the company's values, whether those values align with yours. Also, know about the role you applied for and your reasons for wanting it as well. Also try to understand why you want to join that company and how your values match theirs. Another thing is knowing what to expect. So I would advise reading through any information provided beforehand. Usually employers include a lot of information in their invitation, and this is where they'll discuss what type of activities and exercises you can expect, and also if you need to prepare anything in advance. Make sure you take with you whatever you need for the day and ask the recruitment team if you have any questions. You can simply just send an email. It's better be safe than sorry. Another thing is if you have been informed of what type of exercises to expect, then I would advise practicing those beforehand. You will feel more at ease when doing the actual assessment center. And if you were asked to prepare a presentation, then make sure you practice that in advance too. If you are unsure, once again, ask the recruitment team for recommendations of what you can practice. Another thing that is very important is do not compare yourself with anyone. Most employers assess based on specific scoring criteria, not on how candidates perform against other candidates. Often, assessment centers will include group exercises because companies want to see if you work well with others, which is an essential part of many roles nowadays. So, whilst thinking about your performance in the group activity, make sure that you also support and encourage others in your group. Make sure that you listen and you are engaged in the conversation with them. Make sure that you are respectful, you are polite and professional. You are competing against the process of the employer, not with each other. So remember that. And if you just finished an exercise and you believe that it didn't go as well as you would have expected, or you would have wanted it, please don't dwell on it. Move on to your next exercise, next assessment center, and focus on the next one. Don't dwell on it. Move on to the next exercise, next assessment center, and
Oh, I think Anastasia might have frozen.
assignment.
Hopefully.
Forget about it and take opportunity to succeed and to shine. Don't lose your personality. Oh, here I am. I think I'm back.
Yeah, I think you froze just for a second and then you spoke very quickly and it caught up. So hopefully it comes back quickly, although it looks like you might have gone again.
I'm back. I'm sorry about that. Oh, can you hear me now? Okay, I think I'm back. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back now.
Phew, okay, that was stressful. Apologies, everyone.
I didn't have to bring out the jokes.
Oh, what a shame. Okay, so I'm gonna finish off with the last one. Hopefully, you heard me covering most of these, but I think the last one, which is personally for me is one of the most important is do not lose your personality. Make sure that you showcase yourself and your unique personality throughout the day. Employers want to learn more about you and about your character, because this is something that will make you stand out amongst the other candidates. So that being said, I know I did give you a lot of information today, and I just want to take a few minutes to go through our application process. So I did mention that we will open for application shortly, and that will happen in on the 15th of August, so a bit more than a week to go. But our process consists of 4 simple stages, and the first one, as you probably already know, is the application form. It takes approximately 10 to 20 minutes to complete. We also operate on a blind CV process, and this process has been streamlined and automated to improve your experience and also to allow you to take control of your application. So what I mean behind CV blind process is that we do not check your CV once we are reviewing your application. For us, your CV is used only for onboarding and vetting purposes when you do receive the offer. So when it comes to eligibility criteria, we do have some things that you need to consider before submitting an application. And the first one is a 2.1 degree or equivalent, or if you are still studying, this has to be predicted. Another thing is commitment to being nationally mobile. Our programs are all over the UK, and you might have some of the rotations throughout the graduate program, so it's important for us that you are nationally mobile and willing to relocate. You are fluent in English and you are eligible to work in the UK. Visa sponsorship is available, and it is reviewed on a case-by-case basis and taken into account the governmental guidelines at the point of when the offer is made. So after you submit that application, you will be invited to the online immersive assessment. So this is an assessment with a series of activities to complete around a narrative focused on the challenges and successes you could experience at HSBC. All candidates receive personalized feedback report, and successful candidates are invited to the next stage, which is the job simulation. And this is an exercise using a range of different question types, including video response, written response, ranks, sliders, and different things like that, with various assessment components. So remember, we discussed that towards the beginning of the session. So critical judgment, behaviors, written and verbal communication against real role challenges that are specific to the business area you are applying to. And if you are successful, you will get a chance to be invited to the virtual experience day. So this is our assessment center, and it is split into 2 parts. Part A, which is a series of micro exercises, and you will have a deadline which you would need to complete them by. They are usually completed before the actual virtual experience day. And part B will offer you a chance to get to know one another and involve sort of more traditional interview experience, looking at strength-based and technical interviews covering motivation, technical knowledge, and strength-based question. We also give you an opportunity to meet as many people as possible who actually work in a business area you are applying for, and also current graduates, to make sure that you hear as many opinions as possible about the role, about the bank, about the business area. So this is our recruitment process. And this is the final part of my presentation. On the screen, you can see some of the useful sort of links and details, contact details as well. So our email is uk.graduaterecruitment@hsbc.com. Our team manages that email, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And that's everything from me. Thank you so much. We are a bit over time, and I apologize for that. Charlie, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anastasia, for that session. So much useful stuff coming out of it. It's been a pleasure to listen to you today. As Anastasia said, if you've got any questions at all, feel free to reach out. Similarly, if you've got any questions about Enactus UK, feel free to reach out either to myself or Anshul. Anshul will pop our email addresses in the chat as well. But as I said, thank you very much for coming, everybody, to the second session of the Employability Summer Series. We are looking forward to seeing you on the next one. The recording of this session, if you'd like to relive this fantastic experience, will be available about 24 hours afterwards. You will also be receiving an email following this session, which will just ask for any feedback that you've got from the session on what you found useful about it, what could have improved it, etc., etc. So if you could fill that out, that'll be much appreciated, as it helps us create more and better opportunities for you moving forward. So thank you very, very much for everybody for attending, and we will see you on the next one.